From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. You can catch us on Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul. In today's Dialogue, we're in conversation with some of our colleagues at NPR. The Illinois Public Media Newsroom visited Chicago for the National Association of Black Journalists. We had a chance to learn and connect with some of today's Black journalists and storytellers from across the nation. We attended workshops, lectures, and joined some really insightful conversations. One including the conversation about former Republican President Donald Trump's visit as a speaker at the convention this year.
An epic meltdown from the ex-president this afternoon, speaking with 3 journalists at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference in Chicago.
A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe Black district attorneys. You've attacked Black journalists, calling them a loser. Why should Black voters trust you?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner, a first question. You don't even say, hello, how are you?
Some of your own supporters have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you?
How do you define DEI? How do you define
diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman.
I respect
she went to a historically
either
Black
one,
college.
but she obviously doesn't.
Right now, Sidney Madden is joining the conversation. She's currently an audio journalist for NPR Music. She has produced Tiny Desk concerts, and she serves as co-host and co-creator for the Louder Than a Riot podcast. It was NPR Music's first narrative investigative podcast. It focused on the relationship between hip-hop as an art form and mass incarceration, and much more.
I'm Sidney Madden.
I'm Rodney Carmichael, and from NPR Music, this is Louder Than a Riot.
A warning before we begin. This podcast is explicit in every way.
Whenever we're going through something in this culture, everybody gets silent. They don't get as loud as they do for the Black man.
Season 1 looked at the way hip-hop is marginalized in America. For Season 2, we're looking at who gets marginalized within hip-hop.
And how misogynoir, the sexist prejudice against Black women specifically, is embedded into the fabric of the culture we love.
That was a clip of the Louder Than a Riot podcast. In addition to Louder Than a Riot, Madden serves as guest host as All Things Considered, where her work consciously allows listeners to raise questions to today's music scene. And her interviews with artists and musicians shows audiences how they continuously push the boundaries of the music industry. Louder Than a Riot ended in 2023, but Sidney Madden breaks down to us the impact of the show and the barriers it chose to break down in the Black community and the hip-hop industry. Right now, she's going to share a bit of her favorite moments when working on the Louder Than a Riot podcast and how it constantly met cultural moments and structural inequalities facing Black America and how we see it today. Sidney Madden, thank you so much for having this dialogue with me.
Thank you for asking me. I'm so excited to be in dialogue with you.
How are you feeling today? How does it feel to be in this space with your other colleagues from different mediums? And also, how does this safe space feel for you?
The idea of NABJ 2024 being a safe space feels like a precarious one this year specifically. I mean, and we can just get into it. The elephant in the room, I think the ripple effects of inviting Republican nominee Trump to this so-called safe space has really eroded a lot of the tentpoles of what we're even trying to accomplish here, which is enrichment and longevity of Black storytelling, Black journalism. And so this year's NABJ definitely feels, even though there have been there's been record attendance, and there's been all these firsts that have been happening. Our team is the first podcast team to be recognized in the distinction of Journalist of the Year. Even with all those firsts, it still feels like there's a lot of conflicting narratives and conflicting point of views coming into this space. So I don't know if I would call it a safe space as much as years past. I haven't attended many NABJ conventions. I've attended a couple, but yeah, this one being so newsmaking for such a divisive topic in an extremely divisive year, it's all kind of precarious.
As an audio journalist attending NABJ, there seems to be more television broadcasting spaces here at the conference rather than audio and podcasting spaces. But this year, you are being recognized alongside with your co-host and colleague, Rodney Carmichael, as Journalist of the Year. Congratulations. And tell us more about the recognition that Louder Than a Riot is receiving, and what does this mean for you?
First off, it was an absolute surprise. I remember during the awards application cycle, our team did apply for an audio category award for the NABJ awards, but we definitely didn't apply for Journalist of the Year. So this distinction came completely out of the blue for us. Like that email, when they sent that email, I was like, is this right? Are you sure? I think our first reaction was genuine shock and surprise. I feel grateful that the audio storytelling that we did, which is still considered very niche, even in the emerging medium of podcasting, was recognized and was heard and connected with some people. Specific to our second season of Louder Than a Riot, we tackled, through the lens of hip-hop storytelling, we tackled themes like misogynoir, themes like homophobia and transphobia within the hip-hop community and by and large within the Black community. And to know that kind of our cultural audit of something we love is what we're being recognized for, I think speaks to a nice sea change that can be happening within this advocacy organization. But even in this moment, like I said, that can happen, and simultaneously an invitation, someone who feels like the exact antithesis of what this organization is about being invited. It's a weird dichotomous overlap of emotions that, I don't know, maybe they'll name it on Inside Out 3 or 4 or something, but yeah, it's a lot of emotions.
I also want to ask you, why is the work you do important, especially right now in the times that we're living in?
I think the times we're living in are, there's a joke online, and it's sad because it keeps being more and more true. We are really living in unprecedented times. In a sense, we've been here before because it's the same themes and the same stories, the same fear and hatred that's motivating a lot of it, but the vehicles are changing, and the terms, the dog whistle terms, the politics, the weaponization, it's all being revolutionized. So I think we live in very contentious and divisive times, and to know that Louder, and even just broadly all the music journalism and cultural journalism that I get through and get out to the world, it can educate and it can advocate and it can inspire someone to dig deeper and look at some of the most beautiful and some of the most dark truths that we have about us and our human experience that we hold in this country, this word to Beyonce, this complicated country. I just feel like it's an honor to tell those stories. Every time I hear from a reader or a listener or a viewer when we do visuals that they learned something new, or it was a light bulb moment, it never dawned on them, they never made that connection before, that's what the work is really about to me. Because I've said this before, but the best thing about journalism and the art of storytelling is I get to learn something, and I get to share what I learn. And, that passes on, that ripples, that reverberates. And so everything I do is just going to be rooted in that.
Why was creating Louder Than a Riot important to you? And I'm sure you could speak a little bit on behalf of the team, important to them and important for the culture.
So the first season of Louder Than a Riot dropped in the fall of 2020, which, we can all remember what our country was going through at that time. But actually the seeds of Louder were planted within Rodney and myself all the way back in 2017. And in 2017, it really started with Meek Mill's probation case just being this lightning rod to talk about prison reform in America, and how many outlets were latching on to the Meek Mill story without really excavating and digging into the hip-hop aspect of it and its connection to the carceral state.
Philly rapper Meek Mill has just been sentenced to 2 to 4 years in state prison after a judge found him guilty of violating his probation. After the judge's ruling, he was immediately taken into custody. Mill was convicted in 2008 on drug possession and weapons charges.
The legal saga surrounding Meek Mill is now over. After more than a decade spent on probation, that case finally came to an end. The rapper entered a guilty plea on a single misdemeanor gun charge, and the DA says he will not face any more punishment.
I feel like everything happens for a reason. What I went through is terrible, and I think it's a path that God put me on for a better time like right now, because at one point in my life I was actually addicted to opioids, and I think it should be a line drawn where you have a drug problem and you're scared to tell your probation officer you have a drug problem because you don't want to be sent to prison for years.
And so we knew we had an opportunity there to tell deep investigative reporting and match that with nuanced cultural reporting that only we could bring to it as music journalists who had been working in the field. At that time, I was probably like 8 years into my career. Rodney was far more. I don't know if I want to say how much. I won't speak for him. But carving out a beat at the intersection of hip-hop culture as an art form and social force, and matching that with larger socio-political movements and cultural shifts that are happening, it actually bode well for our reporting, because a lot of times we can make that connection that others couldn't make. And so the first season, it took a long time to report out. We reported out stories of the aftermath of the death of Nipsey Hussle. We reported stories of New Orleans rapper Mac Phipps being wrongly accused of murder and having his rap lyrics used against him in the court case. We reported out Bobby Shmurda, the Brooklyn rapper, being one of the first internet sensations, and also having his fame and his upward mobility ripped away from him because he was painted to be the leader of his gang, and his lyrics were used against him in that sense too, with the power of the prosecutor. And so in connecting all these seemingly disparate, seemingly niche hip-hop moments that the broader mainstream culture doesn't really think about that much. Like, yeah, you might have seen a Bobby Shmurda meme in 2014, but nobody was thinking about the connections that his case had to New York's judicial practices, or you can think about a lot of people being inspired by Nipsey Hussle in the aftermath of his death, but not seeing how the neighborhood being over-policed contributed to a lot of the lore of his stature and what the neighborhood felt like in the aftermath of his passing. So in making those seemingly disparate cultural and structural, racially reinforced inequalities connected, I think we were able to start a lot of dialogue and open a lot of people's eyes in that sense. And then going into season 2, actually, as we were putting together season 1, that is when news broke that Megan Thee Stallion, who was the hottest rising star at the time, that she had been assaulted, and then facts started to trickle out that maybe it was someone else in the car with her who did it, and then maybe it was a fellow musician, Tory Lanez, and then there was all this back and forth in the court of public opinion, which is a very insular place in hip-hop. You know, those shade room comments be twisting narratives and be creating narratives a lot. But you know, that's what I mean, the peanut gallery and the cultural blowback that Megan was facing in the midst of recovering from this injury and this assault, it was already just a light bulb moment and a beacon to us about what we needed to do with season 2, because we didn't want to reinforce a lot of the perceived criminality that hip hop has bared upon it for so long. So we wanted to look inward and flip the script, change the focus to see in which the ways hip hop has actually also become a juggernaut of industry and culture, and it reinforces a lot of the isms it was created to fight, and it was created to be a source of liberation.
You're currently listening to Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Coming up next on Dialogue, we are continuing our conversation with music and audio journalist from NPR, Sidney Madden. Stay with us on Dialogue after this short break. From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Right now, you're tuning into a conversation with NPR music journalist Sidney Madden. She was recently awarded Journalist of the Year at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference. She sat down with me and shared some of her thoughts on where the culture is today and what it means to be a Black journalist. You briefly mentioned the cultural shift. Where do you think the cultural shift is right now?
I think hip-hop culture feels more, in a sense, it feels bigger than ever, but also more segmented. And I could even say segregated, because it's like you can choose your adventure, you can choose your player, you can wake up listening to Lotto and Flo Milli and Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, No Name, Rhapsody, all these fire ass women, and then you can like turn the page or switch to a different playlist, and it's Kendrick and Drake going at each other, people who are considered the Mount Rushmore of hip hop, or at least like 2010s hip hop, and they're actually reinforcing a lot of the same old patriarchal, misogynistic stereotypes that hip hop has stood on for so long, in a way that, again, it kind of remixes the story, but it's the same old themes. Because in having a beef and you're spewing a lot of, hatred and jabs at each other, going bar for bar, but even in the midst of that, women are the punchline, whether it be an accusation that you're abusing your longtime fiance or an accusation that you're grooming underage girls, and you keep people in your camp who are doing the same. It's a lot of divergent paths, I would say, right now. Also, we're in an election year, and hip-hop has always been used as a cultural vehicle in elections. You can look that up through Getty Images and Google Images and all the old rallies through time, but I feel like there are so many artists who are actually, we're in a time of oversaturation. We're in a time of a lot of money being thrown around too, and I think a lot of artists are not actually looking into the candidates' policies. They're just looking for a check and a viral moment. And it's so funny, we live in a time where so much information is readily available, more than any other time in history. And it's like people are accessing less of it. And then are picking up on one thing to confirm their suspicions or their biases. And that happens in hip hop too. Like there are artists who are supporting the presumptive Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, and then there are artists who are supporting Donald Trump, who's going to be the Republican nominee. And I cannot say on either side that I have seen much fact-based education as to why artists are supporting each one of them. You can see broad strokes and like easy Spark Note style narratives of why they are, but I don't know that there's an artist out there. I would have to do more research myself, but I don't see an actual artist out there who is being used as cultural capital and actually knows how they're being used. Hip hop remains always the coolest thing to tap into as a culture, and you can even see that in the international market too, and how Afrobeats is taking over so much, but how the biggest stars in the Afrobeat space now use inflections of hip hop and R&B too to really get that big mainstream appeal without crossing over into a straight US market sound. And so I think hip hop has never been bigger, but it's also never been more subset, segmented, and divergent.
In a world of saturated media right now and content that doesn't always depict the truth, what do you think audiences should be open to learn about Black culture, Black stories, Black voices?
I think in order to be an educated news consumer, and this is if you're looking for Black news or not, you gotta be able to spot, identify, and decipher misinformation, number one, because we definitely live in a time of misinformation and disinformation running rampant, which is why it is supremely disappointing that the board of NABJ or whoever made the decisions would choose to platform someone whose whole MO is weaponizing misinformation. That's one thing. I think within the realm of Black storytelling, I just hope that people actually come to stories with an open mind and the humility to be able to change your opinion, because a lot of people will stay in their bubbles and read what confirms their own biases pretty often, right? You got to be able to have the curiosity matched with the empathy, matched with the humility to reserve the right to change your mind about things. There can be statistics. I was just in a talk earlier this morning with Nicole Hannah-Jones, and she's someone whose reporting is always rooted in historical facts and statistics, but she also said you can have all the stats out there that you want, but it's about the narrative that you cull from those stats and those facts. And that's what wins elections and loses elections. That's what changes people's minds. That's what creates sea changes of power over time. Slowly or swiftly, either one. And I think Black storytelling is just becoming more beautiful because it's not presenting one depiction of Blackness, one depiction of American Blackness, I could even say, one depiction of Black womanhood, Black men, Black trans people. I think the lanes are opening more and more and more, and I look forward to the day that all of our overlapping identities can exist, and it doesn't have to be a lane at all. It doesn't have to be, we can stop talking about false objectivity. We can stop talking about things like confirmation bias. And in interviewing Moya Bailey, who's a sociologist who coined the term misogynoir back in the early 2000s, she said, I can't wait for I think it's important to name something because that's how you learn how to dismantle it, is when you can name it and you can have that vocabulary. But I can't wait for the day where misogynoir is obsolete and we don't need to know that word anymore. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to the day where there's so many of us expressing our own stories within the stories we're reporting, and bringing to light the layers and the multitudes of our identity. And so it's not something that's considered purely a Black story that Black people should care about. Everyone should care about it.
What is a source of liberation within your own work? And what can we expect next from Sidney Madden?
Ooh, I love that question. I think a source of liberation for me in my work and also just in my life is when I get to discover an artist who is walking the walk in their music and using their music and their influence to bring up new stories in the world and just be that force, that undeniable force. That's really what drew me to Megan Thee Stallion.
Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Thee Stallion.
I can't tell y'all how excited I am to be here. You know me, then you know I go by more than one name. Let's see, we got Tina Snow, Hot Girl Coach, the H-Town Hottie. And if you are one of my many haters, I'm a savage, attitude nasty, talk big, but my bank account match it. Hood, but I'm classy, rich, but I'm ratchet. Haters kill my name in their mouth, now they gagging. Kasegu, watashi wa star, kira, watashi wa star.
Early when I first started seeing her freestyles, I mean, Megan, what can we say about Megan? The hotties already know. She's tall, she's sexy, she's confident, she doesn't play small. She subverts all of these ideas about how she should wield her sexuality and who she's doing it for. And she can also rap. She can rap. She's not an avatar or just a placeholder in the space who, I should say, she is sexy. She loves being sexy. She exudes that, but she doesn't rest on that laurel. And I mean, I don't have any shade for anyone who does rest on their laurel, because hip hop is such a male-dominated, male-propelled space. So if you want to get in on your sexiness, I don't have any problem with that either, right? Get it how you live. But I am also just such a fan of her cadence, her breath control, her wordplay, how she incorporates other parts of her personality about back when she was a student, her love of Japanese culture and anime, which we're seeing pulled out more and more, which I love, her ability to just be a walking meme and add new things to our lexicon all the time and just completely encapsulate what it feels like to be a hot girl. She's a girl's girl. She's a hot girl. I remember in interviewing people about her when we were reporting on season 2, somebody said she gives head cheerleader without being mean girl, which is just such a great, sum up of her. For me, a source of liberation is anytime I get to come in contact with that artist, discover that artist, be energized by the art they're putting out in the world, and then share that with others. It was, I want to say it was Tony K. Bambara who said, the job of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And we may not be talking about, civil rights, right, as a revolution anymore, but we are definitely talking about the safety and sanctity of Black women. We are definitely talking about reproductive rights. We are definitely talking about the right to tell our stories in ways that we lived it, not in ways that other people deem it should be presented. And I think that's the thing that keeps me going on it. Even working 10 years on the beat of Black music, I've been able to fan out my coverage to include more than just Black American music, because it's a global conversation we're having. We've been having it, but it's even more fervent now, which I'm really excited about. And I just look forward to more opportunities for connecting with the culture as a cultural journalist.
Within your storytelling, within your work as a music journalist, what inspires you? And what has changed your outlook and perspective in your personal life?
The art of good conversation really inspires me. I go to a party, I'm not there for the kitty and small talk. I'm here to lock in with somebody or a few people and just like connect. The art of connection, the art of conversation, the intimacy that it provides. I think in our medium specifically, the intimacy of audio is really important, and I'm glad more people are starting to realize that. I'm inspired by you. Like, you're a great storyteller and a great conversationalist yourself. I'm inspired by real people who are living the theories that maybe we could talk about, and we could talk about in theory and semantics, but like they're really living it and they're really doing it. I'm inspired by my community of Black women journalists, Black feminist journalists too. I'm inspired by music that drops. I'm inspired by a lot of things: photography, videography, art, food, just like, all the regular things. But yeah, I'm inspired by the art of storytelling and the ways that, I'll say specifically, Black people have always been storytellers. Like, that's one of the keys to our resilience and our survival, right? And I just love how, as Black storytellers, we continue to revolutionize every space we touch and every space we create. Yeah.
Sidney Madden, thank you so much for having this dialogue with me.
Thank you. This was great.
That was Sidney Madden, music journalist for NPR. You're listening to Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent, and we're taking a quick break on this conversation. Next up, you'll be hearing from Corey Antonio Rose. He received this year's Emerging Journalist Award at the National Association of Black Journalists. Stay with us on Dialogue.
Who you think I am?
From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. And now, Corey Antonio Rose joins the dialogue. This year, at the National Association of Black Journalists, he was awarded Emerging Journalist of the Year. We had the privilege to sit down with Corey and ask him a few questions on what it means to him to be awarded this year's Emerging Journalist. Corey Antonio Rose now joins my co-producer, Penny Bradford, in this conversation.
So let's start by diving into how you got to this point. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, how you started working for NPR, KQED, and other organizations that you've been producing for?
So I got started actually in South Florida. I've been doing journalism since high school, doing TV Pro and little PSAs that would air on the news. And then I went to undergrad for journalism at Florida Atlantic University. I was the station manager of OWL Radio, which was our campus radio station. And from there, I started reporting nationally on LGBTQ issues for South Florida Gay News, which is a, I believe now defunct, local newspaper that's in South Florida servicing the queer community. So even from my earliest professional experiences, I've always been reporting at the intersections of public health, policy, and culture. And then moving that into grad school, I ended up pursuing audio journalism, did an internship with KQED where I was on the Right Nowish podcast. And I was able to produce a series about the queer and Black history of the Bay Area, which was sorely underreported. And got to do a really cool podcast about the first Black and queer owner of a gay bar in San Francisco. And doing that piece opened up a lot of different opportunities for me to report and do live events on just different queer history things happening in the Bay Area. Yeah. I got to do a panel with women of the Black Panther Party, examining their history and their contributions to the party, but also the impact of their work decades later. And then from there, I moved to NPR. I'm on a cool show called It's Been a Minute. We do 2 episodes a week, and we dive into why and how culture happens.
So can you tell me what that looks like as far as working on a podcast and representing culture in society in such a way?
Sometimes that looks like why the memes of Vice President Kamala Harris are being so popular. Other times it's like looking at the history of something like self-immolation and what does that tell us about the human condition. So yeah, over time, it's been a slow shift from hard news reporting towards broader pieces about culture and society.
As someone who is interested in many different forms of storytelling, what made you interested in becoming a journalist specifically?
I don't know. I thought journalism was a more immediate way of storytelling. When you're directing, you're working on one show for 6 weeks minimum. When you're doing journalism, you might have 6 hours for a piece and then you're on to the next. And that idea of being able to build a catalog and, I've seen so many amazing journalists before me be part of the contribution to a greater historical narrative of their subjects, of like the subjects that they cover. I'm thinking specifically of like Tre'vell Anderson and how their coverage has shaped how we think about representation in entertainment for queer people. Yeah, thinking about the journalists that I would look up to, it also inspired me to shift towards culture pieces because I was like, I want to contribute to this narrative of, when people look back in 40 years and they do the deep diving into how people were responding to the historical moments that we're seeing before us, I wanted to be part of that historical record.
So as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community and someone who writes about it heavily as far as the history and the triumph of the community, what have been some of the struggles that you faced in writing that history and uncovering the truths? And how have you overcome that as a Black journalist?
I think a lot of it has been, I've been blessed. I've been blessed to have some amazing editors throughout my career. And so I think my path has definitely been paved by people who had to fight way harder before me. And I always want to acknowledge that. But there have been times where I have to, and I think from those experiences that they have taught me how to navigate a lot of these situations. So I don't have to bear the brunt of it, but also taught me how to communicate the essence of my stories and the ideas behind my stories in a way that makes it transmutable to where I'm not going back and forth with an editor about the meaning of something because I've already told you what that means in the pitch. That being said, I think getting to that place where I feel comfortable doing that has been the biggest challenge. Because it is like navigating workplace relationships, navigating your own understanding of the story. Like you have to know your story in and out to be able to advocate for it and fight it and explain it. Because the first thing people are going to do when you pitch it is ask questions about it.
And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit more and talk about being true to your story and how to interpret that as a journalist. So when you hear the term sitting in your truth, what does that mean to you as a young Black and queer journalist entering the workforce?
Standing in your truth as a journalist for me means staring precedent in the face, staring the industry upheld set of morals and values in the face, and taking those on, but knowing when it's time to break the rules in service of the community, in service of doing no harm, in service of telling the truth. I think sitting in your truth as a Black journalist is knowing and having the discretion and the discernment to know when a story is worth covering and when it's not, and to go push your hardest for the stories that are worth covering.
So this year you were awarded the 2024 Emerging Journalist Award at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. Can you tell me a little bit about what that feels like and what advice you have for other journalists that are striving to be in your shoes?
I would say don't strive for the award, but strive to do the work, and the awards will come. I was not expecting this award. It came into my email on a random Monday. But it came literally in the midst of me juggling 2 different projects. Wow. And I think that focusing on putting out the best work that you can in the moment, the awards will follow. Right. And then as far as broader general advice, I would say try to meet as many people as you can, do high quality work and push it out. Like self-promotion is your key, is your friend. And I know it can feel cringy, but you got to in this industry. And don't be afraid to follow your own interests. It was my own interest that led me into reporting on like the history of the community that I was living in. And from that like opportunity, from that interest, I've gotten so many opportunities to pursue other stories. And yeah, I don't know. It's just the more you work and the more you take yourself seriously, the more seriously others will take you.
So describe that feeling to me. What does it feel like to be recognized in a way where the entire convention is saying congratulations to you? You know, they see you, they recognize you, and they want you to succeed.
Yeah, I think it means exactly what you said. Like, it means that there are people who are watching my work who support me and want me to keep going. And that's a level of responsibility that I definitely take seriously. Because the investment that a mentor puts into you really can make a career. It really can like take your career to the next level. And I see this award as a reflection of the investment that other journalists have put into me and a responsibility to carry that forward and give it to other journalists.
Now, for those that are unaware, NABJ has become a safe place for Black journalists across the U.S. They come, connect, and it's basically become a family reunion for veteran journalists and a welcome to what the organization likes to call their NABJ babies. This year, former President Donald Trump was invited and accepted his invitation for the first time, which caused quite a bit of stir amongst fellow journalists. How do you feel former President Donald Trump's attendance has affected the credibility of the organization? And do you feel like it was the right move?
It's funny. I was literally going to talk about this in my speech. I think that, ask any openly queer person who's been going to NABJ for more than 2 years, and they'll tell you it's never been a safe space. It's never been a completely safe space in the way that there are safe spaces that I know when I go into, I don't have to worry. I think, like, for queer people, we've always had to struggle to find safety at NABJ, and that's well documented. So I'll go on the record for that. I think that the decision to invite the former president to speak at NABJ created a logistical nightmare and a wave of backlash that I cannot see could possibly be worth the actual value of having him here, given what we know about the former president. And I think like part of standing in your truth as a journalist is recognizing that not every opportunity to interview any person needs to be taken.
So you describe his attendance as a logistical nightmare. Can you just describe to me your day one at NABJ?
My NABJ day one scene was a little hectic. It was literally right as people were lining up to see the former president. And so it was just filled with security, sort of a hullabaloo of people trying to figure out where to go and where to be and how they can see him the best. Honestly waiting to see how long their panel was going to last, because I had a panel that was going on at the same time.
That was Corey Antonio Rose speaking with my co-producer, Penny Bradford, as he spoke about receiving this year's National Association of Black Journalists Award for Emerging Journalist of the Year. Up next, we're going to be hearing from the iconic Yolanda Adams as she sat down to tell us more about her experience performing at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference this year. Yolanda Adams spoke with Illinois public media reporter David Pierce.
Like a castaway, search for strength inside. Was it all in vain? 'Cause the deeper you dig, you find more and more pain. Don't let your tomorrow be like yesterday. 'Cause I spoke to God.
David Pierce here, and I'm with the wonderful Yolanda Adams. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, how was the gospel brunch for you tonight?
Oh, the gospel brunch was awesome. I mean, come on. You can't beat Darwin Hobbs. Come on.
Now, tell me, what is something special that happens when you have all these black people coming together and singing about God?
Well, unity, number one, and then unity of purpose. The unity of purpose is to make sure that everyone in the room feels the Spirit of God. And that's always easy to do when, everyone is filled with the Spirit. You just have that connection.
Now, how can people go back on a day-to-day that's not a Sunday and maintain their faith too?
Exactly like you just said. Go back on your day-to-day, remember what happened today, and nourish that by your quiet time with God, nourish that by reading the scriptures, nourish that by loving and being kind to people. And, it's just real simple. People make it hard.
And then also, too, the message has been for Black people to be just obedient to Christ and letting go. How does that look?
Well, it looks like every day. People try to make it just a Sunday thing. It's a lifestyle. You have to develop that calmness of spirit, and then also develop that stillness where you listen, because we're always on our phones. We're always on the run. And God's not going to compete with social media. He's not going to compete with your family. He's just going to wait until you have time to just be still and be with him. And so I think one of the biggest things to do is to just carve out 5 minutes of your time, different parts of the day. If you can do it in the mornings, usually the mornings are the least hectic part of your day. Yeah. If you don't wake up too late, just start 5 minutes and just be thankful.
So don't start with your phone.
Because never. Because thankfulness always yields peace. Because you start remembering all the great things that God did and that God is doing.
And as for Black journalists, we are going through a lot right now with the election and a lot of crime and a lot of dangerous situations that we have to jump in there and get what is knowledge of what is happening so we can help others protect themselves. Mm-hmm. How can we be at peace?
Well, the first thing is stop calling everything negative, because everything happens for a reason. You can start calling things that you have to cover. Okay, I'm going to cover this. But I'm bringing the peace of God. I'm bringing the positivity. Yeah. I'm bringing the nurture. I'm bringing all of that. And I'm going to cover it in honesty and being genuine about it. And then also, don't look at being a Black journalist as being less than. Because you're so much greater than the sum of your words. The power that's in you, the reason they call you is because you bring something different. Walk in that.
That was Yolanda Adams speaking with Illinois Public Media reporter David Pierce. You're currently listening to Dialogue on Illinois Soul. I'm Kennedy Vincent. The Dialogue team would like to thank Sidney Madden, Corey Antonio Rose, and Yolanda Adams for joining us in the art of conversation and connection on what it means to be a Black storyteller in today's world.
Yes, they do. According to the master's purpose and his holy will. No matter what, you in the balcony.
The Dialogue Show is produced by Needhi Shastri, Penny Bradford, and myself, Kennedy Vincent. Our News and Public Affairs Director is Reginald Hardwick, and production assistance by Steve Mork. Dialogue's theme song is by Lamont Holden. Dialogue is a part of Illinois Soul and Illinois Public Media. Join us for our next Dialogue every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. and Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul FM 101.1 and WILL AM 580 Wednesdays at 8 p.m.